Hey, how's everybody doing? Hoping you're having a fantastic day. It is Monday, May 1st, the feast of St. Joseph the Worker. Yesterday was I think it's transferred because yesterday was Sunday, but the transfer would have made today also the feast of St. Pius X. So, wonderful Dominican defender of the faith, and actually the theologian who made St. Thomas Aquinas, the doctor of the Pope who made St. Thomas Aquinas, a doctor of the church. But sorry, I'm sick, so if I blow your eardrums out with my coughing, uh, sounds like a personal problem. But I received a question from a patron, that a really interesting one that I wanted to quickly treat in a video. So if you don't know, if you're a patron, you can request occasional videos. Um, kind of has to be in a realm of something I could give out a video value in. I'm not just gonna make videos on stuff I don't know what I'm talking about just because a patron asked me to. But this patron, this was his question. He said, "Hi Christian, I'm going to invoke my Patreon membership to ask you to make a video. I was wondering if you could make a video on whether or not one's merits in terms of your future state in heaven stay with you after mortal sin and forgiveness. In Life Everlasting, Lagrange says that it is the more probable opinion that one's merits stay with you after God forgives you. St. Alphonsus very strongly states the contrary in his Meditations on Death. Have any other saints dealt with this matter? Are there alternative positions to hold?" So, first, what I'm going to do, just quickly, is St. Thomas actually deals with this exact question in a few places, but he has a Summa question. Interestingly enough, the one of the last questions that he wrote before he unfortunately passed. This is in. I'm going to share my screen. This is in Tertia Pars, question 89, Article 5. Whether deeds deadened by sin are revived by penance. So, whether when you do a meritorious deed, if upon falling into mortal sin and being revived by penance, whether that deed still counts. That's basically the question that's being asked. And St. Thomas responds, "Some have said the meritorious works deadened by subsequent sin are not revived by the ensuing penance, because they deem such works to have passed away, so that they could not be revived. But that is no reason why they should not be revived, because they are conducive to eternal life, wherein their life consists, not only as actually existing, but also after they cease to exist actually, and as abiding in the divine acceptance. Now they abide thus so far as they are concerned, even after they have been deadened by sin, because those works, according as they were done, will be acceptable to God and give joy to the saints, according to Apocalypse 3:11. Hold fast which thou hast, that no man take thy crown. That they fail in their efficacy to bring the man who did them to eternal life is due to an impediment of the supervening sin whereby he has become unworthy of eternal life. But this impediment is removed by penance, inasmuch as sins are taken away thereby. Hence it follows that deeds previously dead recover, through penance, their efficacy in bringing him who did them to eternal life. And, in other words, they are revived. It is therefore evident that deadened works are revived by penance. So what St. Thomas is basically saying is that our merits, our condign merits, are based upon some promise of God in binding himself to justice. This promise does not cease to be in itself unless there's some impediment which is placed to its efficacy. So when we fall into mortal sin, there's some impediment to the granting of the reward, namely the deadness of grace in the soul, which leads to hell. So with this impediment of the mortal sin, the reward can't occur. But when the impediment's removed, the promise of God to reward is not going to fail. So that's St. Thomas's general argument. And he actually provides a little bit of here in Reply to objection 3. So he says, he who through penance rises to lesser charity will receive the essential reward according to the degree of his charity, which he has found, yet he will have greater joy for the works he had done in his former charity than for those which he had done in subsequent charity, and this joy belongs to the accidental reward. So he does actually provide, depending on the degree of charity, the degree of fervency that is achieved through the sacrament of penance, through the fervency of one's contrition, there actually can be a bit of variableness. So for St. Thomas, it's neither strictly lost nor 100% in every single aspect gained back. There's some sort of change that happens, which we'll be getting into when we start talking about the different views. So that's just plainly the view of St. Thomas. Pretty easy to understand. But since the time of St. Thomas, the magisterium has actually stepped in on this. So first we can look at implicit statements. The Council of Trent gives requirements for meriting. None of these requirements mention not falling into mortal sin afterwards, so we can make an implicit argument from that, but that's not the strongest. The best formal testimony comes from Pius XI. When he declared a year of Jubilee in, I want to say 1934, possibly 1934, maybe somewhere during the reign of Pius XI. He said, "Now when the Hebrews in the year of the Sabbath, after recovering their goods, which had passed into the ownership of others, were returning to their own possessions, and the servants, now free, were betaking themselves to their former family, and the debt of the debtors was cancelled. All this more happily happens and is accomplished among us in the year of atonement. For all who, by doing penance, carry out the salutary orders of the Apostolic See in the course of the great Jubilee, the same regain anew and receive that abundance of merits and gifts which they had lost by sinning, and they are so set free from the cruel dominion of Satan that they regain the freedom wherewith Christ has made us free. And finally, of all the punishment which they would have been obliged to pay for their faults and sins because of the highly accumulated merits of Jesus Christ, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and the saints, they are fully absolved." So what this is saying right here, Pope Pius X is saying that by carrying out penance, you regain anew the abundance of merits that you had lost by sinning. So clearly it is the teaching of the Church now that this revivification of merits is something which must be held. So there is some question within the schools, although, when it comes to the measure or degree of the revivification of merits. So on the one hand, some following Domingo Banez say that we receive the rewards of our previous merits according to our present disposition. That is, according to the disposition one has after penance. So we can describe it as like the penance getting, the previous merits get dragged down to the position of the penitent. So to illustrate, if you have somebody who gains, let's say, 100 talents. I hate using terms of quantity, but I think this is the best way of us being able to conceptualize the different positions. So let's say you have 100 talents that you gain from meritorious deeds. Now, let's say after you're fallen to sin, you lose all 100, and then you come back with a disposition to receive 5 talents. That is the degree you're going to come back. You come back at the level that you come back. Now, this position seems to be, on the face of things, false. Because how can you speak of the revivification of merits at all when it's just really doesn't make any sort of difference between whether you had merited before or not? So if you had a man who had merited 100 talents and a man who had merited 10 talents, they both fall into mortal sin. They both have the coming back in penance, and are disposed to receive 5 talents. They both receive 5 talents. So in what sense can we even speak in this view of revivification? So on the other hand, there's a second extreme. And the second extreme is that the merits are rewarded in their fullness with absolutely no sort of um, interplay between one's disposition or not. So you have the man with 100 talents falls into mortal sin, and let's say he comes back with weakened contrition from what he was previously. He's just going to receive the 100 talents back. Now, on the face of things, this seems to not contradict the teaching of the church, but it's problematic because I don't see how, in this view, one could even explain the initial falling into um, uh, mortal sin and the losing of one's merits by a lack of disposition, because one can be more or less disposed. So it seems like it should work on a grade rather than an absolute, like the second position wants to make it. Now, the third position, this is the one taken by the majority of the Thomists, and this is the position that seems to be taken by St. Thomas, is that the reward is revived according to the disposition of the receiver. So if you, let's say, it's hard to quantify this one, I guess, because on the one hand, you can have somebody who has 100 talents, falls into mortal sin, loses that reward, and then actually comes back with greater fervor than before. In this case, he's going to receive an even greater reward due to his greater fervor. On the other hand, you may have a man return with equal fervor, so he's going to receive equal reward. On the third hand, you might have somebody that returns with lesser fervor, then he's going to receive a lesser reward. But there still is that interplay with the previous gift. So I guess this one can be seen more as, like, if we want to quantify it, which again, hate to do it, this one can speak more of percentages than of absolutes. So to quantify it for you guys, you have a man, he returns after penance with 10% greater fervor. The merits that he had before are going to be 10% greater. Same fervor, same merits, 10% less merits. It's not like the first one, which just has it kind of get knocked down to whatever the position of the penitent is without any sort of relative consideration of previous merits. And then it also doesn't have the pitfall of the second, which doesn't really take into account the disposition of the receiver. So that's at least the way in which I would describe the three views. So that's all I have. Thank you to the patron who asked this question. And if you would like me to make a short video like this answering one of your questions within my domain, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/militant Thomist. Thank you and God bless.